Good morning and welcome to Rose Red Homestead. We're so glad to have you with us today. And we're going to be talking about over-the-counter pain medication. Now, as we are all aware, sometimes things don't mean a whole lot to us until it affects us personally. And that was sort of what happened to me as I have aged, and especially over the past 5 years. And 5 years ago, I started having some pain in one of my hips, and it was very mild. I handled it just fine. I was still wearing my heels to work and walking all over campus. And gradually it has gotten a little worse. And this past year has been pretty bad. And so I was trying to find the right pain reliever. Finally went to my doctor, who prescribed a medication for me, and that was wonderful. But it quit working after 2.5 months. I mean, it just stopped. And of course, it was right during the Christmas holidays when I couldn't get in touch with him. And so for 2 or 3 weeks, I was walking with a cane. And I figured, this is ridiculous. I need to do something about this. I need to learn more about the different types of pain medications that are out there. And as I began to do that research, one of the things that I realized was this is exactly the type of research that is needed for our emergency preparedness as well. Because what I learned, especially about pain, and I've been so blessed in my life not to have suffered from a lot of pain, occasionally, of course, like we all do, but not any kind of chronic pain before, although I have known many people who have, and my heart has just gone out to them. But one of the things that I learned about pain of this magnitude, and mine is not super severe, so just keep that in mind as we go through here. But pain management is both an art and a science, and we need to have our doctors helping us make some choices. Even though these medicines that we're going to be talking about are over-the-counter, it is always a really good idea to involve our attending physician. Now, Jim and I are really good about seeing our doctor when we need to and having yearly checkups. And most of the time, everything goes just fine. But I want to just, before we get started, and this is some caveats that we need to be aware of when we talk about medications. First of all, some types of pain respond better to a particular type of pain medication than they respond to other types. And so sometimes it is like a little science experience to try to figure out which medication does the best job on the particular type of pain that we are having. And each person's response is different. So where one might work for my hip pain, someone else with hip pain might think, oh, well, it worked for her, it'll work for me too, and it doesn't. And that is the way that it is. It's the way our bodies respond to the chemicals that are in pain medications. So don't give up. Just keep trying other alternatives. Then the second thing, you need to alert your provider, your medical provider, if you are going to be taking over-the-counter pain medication. Many of them are okay for short term, but if they're on a daily basis over the long term, they can cause some pretty severe side effects, and we'll talk about a few of those when we get into the actual medicine. So just be a partner with your medical provider in your pain management, and don't try to do it all on your own, even though you're very smart, like all of us are. Then it is very important to take the recommended amount. And I have a chart which gives the recommended amounts, and I'm going to give you links to a couple of charts that I'm going to show you here in just a minute. But be sure that you follow the instructions carefully, unless otherwise directed by your physician. So again, be in partnership with your medical provider. And then read the warning labels on the medication. Know if you have certain other conditions that might conflict with medication. It's important for you to know that. So be sure that you read what the contraindications are of the medications, what the side effects are. And don't take it if your other issue is listed as something that would be exacerbated by the particular pain medication. And then it is very, very important that we store medications safely and securely, especially if there are children in the house. So with those little caveats, we're just going to jump right in, but I'm going to start with a personal story. Years and years ago, as a young teenager, when I started my very first menstrual cycle began, I was not surprised. I'd been waiting for it. Everybody else was starting before I was, and oh, what's the matter with me? And went through all of that kind of stuff. But my mother was a good coach through that whole situation, and even though Dad was not involved, I knew that he knew that I was concerned about it. Well, the day that it happened, I was kind of unprepared for the cramping that went along with it. And it was hard. I'd never felt that kind of stuff before. And so as Mother was helping me get all situated, she said, honey, why don't you just go to your room and snuggle under your covers for a little bit? And maybe that one, she gave me an aspirin, I think, and see if that kind of helps take care of the pain. Well, after a little while, Dad came in my room and he sat down by the edge of the bed. And I knew that he knew what was going on. We didn't need to talk about that aspect of it, but we talked about other things. And one of the things that he said to me that has stayed with me was, he said, now Pam, one of the things that you need to remember is that most of the world's work is done by people who don't feel very well. So you cannot just jump into bed when you have some pain that can be helped with some medication. So just think about that. And so after he left the room, I thought about it for quite a bit, and I realized, you know what? This is going to be happening to me for every single month for practically the rest of my life. And I don't want to go to bed every time it happens. So I got up out of bed, made my bed, and I've pretty much been out of bed ever since in that regard. But Dad was right. We need to be able to function in the real world in spite of some minor pains that we may be having. But the best situation is that we learn to manage our pain. And if we can do it with over-the-counter medications, hallelujah, that's fantastic. And I learned quite a bit as I began to research, trying to home in because my doctor wasn't available. He was out of the country, and my pain wasn't so severe that I needed to talk to anyone else about it. I just waited it out, and it was about 6 weeks, and I had to use my cane for about 3 of those weeks because I couldn't put much weight on my leg, and that was uncomfortable. He had given me a prescription that had just, after 2.5 months completely, one day it stopped working. So I was in the business of trying to sort of figure out what painkiller over the counter I wanted to go on. And that's what triggered the research. And then my link to our YouTube channel. Well, of course, I need to talk about this because this very much has to do with emergency preparedness. It is a good idea for us to have these medications that I have listed right here in a good supply on our emergency preparedness shelves because different pains respond to different medications. My go-to over-the-counter painkiller has been Advil for years. Advil didn't touch the pain I was having in my hip. So that was another thing that triggered this research. So I'm going to share my research with you, but also know that I made myself a table of reference, and it's going in our emergency preparedness binder so that I will have it in case the internet goes down and we're left with just the information that we have on our bookshelves, for instance, and our food storage and that sort of thing. But I want to be able to have the documentation on what pain reliever does what. I have 2 charts that I'm also going to reference by links below the description of this video. So in our binder is going to be the chart that I made for myself and these 2. And this one is probably the better of the 2. If you're only going to run off one, you can run off the one that's yellow and green. This one is a little more simplified, but it has some really good information as well. So let's go over what I found, and it will probably mesh with exactly most of what you already know anyway, but it's good to kind of think about this and talk about this. So one of the things that I found was that over-the-counter medications for pain fall into 2 categories. There is the acetaminophen group, of which Tylenol is the most popular member of this group. Now, acetaminophen is for aches, headaches, fever, but it is not for inflammation. Now, my hip is because of arthritis and it's inflamed. And so Tylenol doesn't even begin to touch the type of pain that I am having. And it's interesting to know how these 2 different types of drugs work. Acetaminophen just blocks the pain. The problem or the cause is still there. It doesn't address the cause. It just stops the pain. So you don't feel the pain, but you still have the cause going on. Tylenol is a very popular drug because it causes fewer side effects. However, too much can cause liver damage. And so this is when you need to be sure that you alert your provider that you are having to take Tylenol every day for week after week after week. Don't do that without discussing that with your doctor to be sure that with your particular situation that it is okay. The second type of drugs are the NSAIDs or the NSAIDs. There are several different pronunciations of this, but what it stands for is it stands for non-steroid anti-inflammatory drugs. And so these are the ones that especially addressed inflammation. So it is in this group right here that I needed to do more research so that I could figure out what worked best for my particular hip pain. So the NSAIDs also treat fever and pain, headache included, but they treat inflammation, and this is how they work. That medicine gets into our bloodstream and it blocks the enzymes that form the chemicals that cause the pain. It's not just stopping the pain, but it is stopping the cause of the pain, and I really like that idea. So there are kind of three categories of NSAIDs. The first is aspirin. Now, I am of the age where growing up, aspirin was our go-to painkiller. And they used to make children's aspirin. I gave children's aspirin to my children, sometimes even to my babies. It was before Tylenol was popular, or maybe even not even on the market yet. And we just used aspirin as our painkiller. Well, since that time, there have been quite a few things linked to aspirin that are not so good for children, including a rare but debilitating Raynaud's syndrome. And so the recommended information on aspirin is avoid it as your first choice. Don't give it to children age 19 or younger because of the Raynaud's syndrome. And then it can be beneficial to the heart. So right here in front of me, I have our Tylenol right here, and there are several different recipes. This is Tylenol PM, so you can take this at night. It's extra strength. Aspirin is unique in that while we don't want to choose it as our first choice, it can be beneficial to the heart. And so Jim's doctor has recommended that he take this reduced dosage aspirin. The reduced dosage used to be children's aspirin, but of course they won't put children's aspirin, the word children's, on an aspirin bottle these days because we're not to give aspirin to children. So the aspirin is listed here. It is kind of a special one in the NSAIDs because it can be beneficial to the heart. The other two in the NSAID are ibuprofen, which is Advil and Motrin, and then naproxen, which is Aleve. Now, the one that I found that worked best for my hip pain was Aleve. And while my doctor was out of the country and unavailable, I discovered after going through several of these that Aleve worked the best for my pain. And so I took the maximum dosage, not going over the instructed limits on that, and it did help really a lot. But it didn't take care of the full pain. I was still having to rely on my cane just a little bit. But once my doctor got back in the country and was able to answer my questions, he changed my prescription of the prescribed drug, which is an NSAID. And then and now I'm pretty much pain-free, and my cane stands at the ready if I need it, but I haven't needed it now for about 3 weeks, so that's been really good. So the information that is included on these charts, this particular one, the yellow and green one, gives the recommended dose, tells you what it is good for, and then gives needed to know information, which is really, really important. The side effects are clearly delineated here so that you will know that you need to watch for things or not take it at all. If you suffer from liver disease, for instance, you're not going to want to take, which one is the one that, Tylenol, too much can damage the liver. So you may want to go down into these. But these, ibuprofen, which is Advil and Motrin and then Aleve, the short term is okay. We don't really need to consult with our doctor if we're just going to go on it for a week or a few days or whatever. But if we're going to go on it long term, like I will do, or was planning to do if Aleve completely cut out my pain, I was going to make sure that my doctor knew so that he could advise me too. Because long term can cause gastrointestinal problems such as bleeding, which we don't want either. So, having these charts that give, now this one I also really liked. This is what to know about over-the-counter pain medication. Acetaminophen, it gives little pictures, good for headache, and here's somebody going like this. Headache, pain relief, fever, menstrual cramps. Ibuprofen gives the list, and naproxen, which is Aleve, gives the list, and then aspirin gives the list. So I thought that both of those charts would be very useful for all of us to have in our emergency preparedness binders. So I hope that this has been useful. There's a lot more information. If you just do a search on Google, you'll have the links to these two for sure. But if you are interested in more medical jargon type charts, there are plenty of those on the web as well. And all I did was I just said, OTC pain medication charts. That was my search line. OTC, over the counter, OTC pain medication charts. And it brought up a ton of charts, and one was way long. And it was tiny type, and it gave lots and lots of information. And it was a little too tedious for me. I read through it, but what these charts do is it takes information like that and puts it in an easier to understand language and helps us that way as well. And two things that we want to remember: consult with your health expert, with your provider. And the other thing is keep a cross-section of over-the-counter pain medications in large supply on your shelves for emergency preparedness. So we have options. If the grid goes down, we can't get to the doctor, we have some pain issues in our family, we will be well prepared with over-the-counter medications to treat whatever. So this has been our primer on over-the-counter pain medications. So thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate you so very much, and we will be back very soon for more videos.